Today we're going to talk about the principles and the elements of design. These are really the things that you're going to use to build your designs, as well as leverage the concepts to ensure that you are effectively communicating, and more than just effectively communicating, but really getting to that essence or that idea of communicating meaning. And when we talk about elements, we're talking about the objects that you're going to build your designs out, not physically, but you're going to make or include in your design. You're going to employ them in your design. And the basic elements are line, plane or shape, texture, value, and color. Let's look at these individually. So line, we're all very familiar with the idea of a line, but did you know that a line can communicate, that it can convey a meaning or an emotion? A line, if you want to talk about specifically, is a visual element of length, and that is created by setting a point in motion. It gives direction, it defines a space, it creates a shape, as well as conveys a mood or a feeling. And there are different types of lines. We have the contour line, which is the line that goes around the outside of something. We also have decorative lines, and these are generally unnecessary, but they serve a purpose, such as this hello with the underline. It's drawing attention to it. It's emphasizing it. We also have dividing lines, and these help us break apart or contain together different elements. So here we have these lines between these rows or these columns of text, right? So it's telling us where one column ends and where the next one starts. You can also have an implied line. We see these dots as a line, even though they're not actually connected, but they create a line. And then one of my favorites is this idea of a psychic line. A psychic line does not exist, but it is somehow created by making our eyes move in that direction. So with this arrow, it forces us to look in that direction. So it's not really a line, but it's a psychic line. Then we also have different weights and orientation to our lines. We have thick strokes, which are really strong, and they provide emphasis to the surrounding elements. And then in contrast, we also have the thin strokes, which are fragile and very elegant. They can be hairline to just a couple of points. We have the vertical orientation, which is strong and dignified and filled with energy and motion. Whereas we have then the horizontal, or the laying down. It's much more calm and comforting, and it exists without conflict. And then we have the diagonals, and this is where things get really fun, because diagonal orientation conveys a sense of movement. It can imply upward or downward, and then the feelings that are associated with that idea of upward or downward. It can also create tension. It can create excitement, and really can convey this idea of movement. Here we've got these buildings of New York City all stacked together, creating these vertical lines that go upward, and they imply this idea of strength or power or growth. And here again, in the back type, in the back, the bold black type really creates these vertical lines that give it a structure and give it a strength. And then we've got this fun type that's put at steps, really walking us down, walking us through this design. Even without any diagonals, we still have a lot of motion. This is by Paula Scher. In contrast, we have this beautiful, curvy, sexy, elegant design by Doyle Young, who makes these wonderful type faces, these cursive typefaces. So you've got all these curves, all this organic and this almost calligraphic lettering here that says reasons to love New York. And it's even in the shape of a heart. How sweet is that? Then by contrast again, here we have again very thin lines, but then paired with these thick strokes that create the letters that say Matthew Dear and Black City. So you've got these geometric shapes that give this sense of structure, and these lines that balance them out and really give us this interesting design. When again, in contrast here, we have these flowing organic. See how structured this is with these simple thin and thick strokes that are very organized, right? So now we've got these curvy lines that suggest organic and suggest movement and less organized, less structured. Okay, so after line, we have plane and shape. And planes and shapes really rely on lines, because a plane is an enclosed line that's two-dimensional. It's distinguished from its surrounding by a defined boundary or a difference in color or texture or value. Planes can commonly be referred to as shapes. So planes or shapes do things for us. They can organize information through connection and separation. They can symbolize different ideas. They can create movement, texture, and depth. They can convey a mood or an emotion, just like lines can, and they can emphasize or create entry points and an area of interest. They also can lead your eye from one design element to the next. So we can really utilize and use them to do all these things for us. Commonly, when we think of shapes or planes, we do think of geometric shapes. These are things like circles or triangles or squares or octagons. They have regular patterns that are easily recognized. The regularity suggests an organization and an efficiency. It also suggests structure. So geometric shapes do tend to be more symmetrical, which also further suggests order. Then in contrast to that, we have our natural organic shapes, which are irregular. They have more curves, they're uneven, they tend to be pleasing and comfortable, not so structured, not so stiff. While they can be man-made, something like an ink blob, they're often typically representations of shapes found in nature, like leaves or flowers or rocks or clouds. On a web page, you might use organic shapes through the use of illustration and photography. They could be free-form, asymmetrical, and they can convey that feeling more of spontaneity. Organic shapes add interest and reinforce a theme. Then we have our abstract shapes. And abstract shapes are recognizable forms, but they are not real. They're stylized or simplified. We see these all the time now. Like think of a stick figure. That's an abstract shape depicting a person. Glyphs are letters. They're abstract shapes that represent letters. Icons are abstract shapes meant to represent ideas. Graphic designers love to make icons because you can convey this abstract idea in a pictorial-like shape. Some abstract shapes actually have almost universal recognition. Think about all the icons you use in your software and see daily. Here are some designs by Paul Rand that use shapes extensively. On the left, we have all geometric shapes, but notice that they're put at an angle that gives them this idea of motion. It's still quite structured, but it also has some playfulness with those angles. Then in the center, we have almost an abstract shape happening, right? Because it looks a bit like a stick figure, even though we're only looking at circles and rectangles. Then on the left, the far left, that's much more organic. Things are curvy, they're not symmetrical, they don't have hard edges, so it's much more organic and it gets a little bit more playful. I love these two designs. We have Big Bang Day with these great, just all simple shapes, but the way that the designer organized them and placed them really makes it playful, gives it a strong focal point, really gives it a lot of motion. And then on the right, we've got this bullseye that's created with this arrow that actually is a book on top, and it's talking about education reform. So just simple shapes are telling us so much about what this is all about. Here's another fun design by Teresa Jaldovec. Don't say her name very well, but we've got these iconic looks of clouds, right? Back here. And then we've got this kind of abstracted person made out of simple shapes. This is just simply a rectangle and a long rectangle, right? So it's really playful, kind of abstracted, but recognizable at the same time. Here's work by Peter Saville, who did a lot of designs for music types in the late 80s, 90s. So you've got these pills, these shapes that where they overlap make more shapes and really are bouncing and vibrating all over this page. So that brings us to texture. And when we're talking about texture and design, we're not necessarily talking about real texture that you can actually feel, but we're talking about the idea or the sense of it. So it's really implied texture, and that's often achieved through the variations of light and dark patterns or marks. So you're not going to actually feel it, but when you look at it, you get that sense. You think if I rub my hand over that, I'm going to feel that rough surface. So here's a design by Dave Carson, where he's got this ink up here implied in this really aggressive manner that I feel like if I put my hand on it, I could feel almost this rough texture to it. And even over here, the way he's handling the type creates little textures or patterns. Another one by Dave Carson for Oasis and Ray Gun magazine. So you get these really wonderful textures being used throughout this, which gives it a much less digital sensibility. It feels like this has been worn. It's been put out in the sun or run over by a bike. And he definitely did that. He's a very Southern California skater, surfer, punk rock guy. And here's yet one more by him, by Dave Carson, that I feel like is not quite as successful because it almost feels a little too digitalized. Like a lot of times now designers will try to intentionally create fake textures to give that realness. So I feel like this one's not as successful as some of his older work. And then I love this Best Coast Crazy For You album cover with this dreamy atmospheric star-studded texture that's happening, almost like diamond dust too. And that's very symbolic of their sound. They kind of have this spacey atmospheric sound, dreamy pop sound to them. That brings us to value. And when we talk about value in design, we're really talking about the relative lightness or darkness of a color or a tone. Any color has a value to it. It's really what artists use to convey a sense of depth or volume. Here you can see when we pull all the color out of this painting, we still can see the forms and the depth and the texture to it, just without the color. So value really helps us define that. You can also use value in your designs to convey a mood. So here we have something by Kelly Anderson that is talking about US energy sources and how they get used. So it's been delivered in this kind of toned down palette, this softer value, making it easier for us to take in this information. Another very playful one for Damien Hirst. He's a designer that makes paintings out of dots and butterflies, and he's kind of known to be a bad boy and very expensive work. So she's playing with the value of his work, using a pun almost with these different values of color. And then the lack of color up here. I love this also kind of washed out use of lighter values and gray tones to create this album cover for The Way Out. Really gives us almost a sense of texture, or like the idea that it's been put out again in the sun or something. And then this has got to be one of the boldest uses of value ever by Richard Hamilton. This album is known commonly as the White Album, when the actual name of it is just The Beatles. Completely constrained here. Only thing he included on it was the word The Beatles embossed on all white, and then just the number. So it's this lack of value, lack of contrast that makes this this incredibly bold statement. Color. So color, we've already talked about it quite a bit, and color is really fun and useful in your designs and really can convey emotions strongly. But the thing you gotta know about color is that it can't save a bad design. It can only enhance a good design. But technically, color is the property of light. It's the way an object absorbs or reflects light. Color choices affect how we react and how we perceive things. Red is always gonna be that needy call to attention, and yellow is always gonna be happy. It can also be caution, right? And blue is generally thought to be serene. So here we see green being used for this idea of recycling or reuse or nature or earth. I love this use of the primary colors. We've got blue, red, and yellow. And this yellow, this use of yellow, not only looks like the sun, but it's indicating that this information contained within this yellow circle is important and that we should pay attention to it. Here's a really simple, playful one with these organic shapes. So again, you're not going to use these things independently, right? And here we got organic shapes with pastel, kind of saturated colors, all giving us this very playful, playful mood and very musically oriented, because it's for Peter, Bjorn, and John, which is a band. Here again, we see the primary colors, and it says in shapes. So look at the difference between that. We've got these organic and these pastel but saturated colors. And now we're back to our primary colors, and we're using more geometric shapes. So very different feeling. And it's saying, learn to say no. Here's one more from Peter Seville. This is for Joy Division to New Order. So we've got this overlapping of these circles, these pulsating colors where the shapes combined with the use of color really create this vibrancy, this like almost you can hear it when you look at it. So as I was saying, these are the tools basically that you're going to use, you're going to employ in your work. You're going to use them to help you with that effective communication, with that goal always to get at something more than just the words and the images alone, to really get to that idea or that ability to convey meaning. Next up, we're going to look at the principles.